I mix what I like, what I like, what I like, what I like. What I like, what I like, what I like, what I like. This is the video. The link to which is in the show notes. Dr. Claud Anderson, longtime author. Powernomics is, I think, his most famous book, the one that I years ago read very carefully, and have seen him lecture and heard him lecture and be referenced. Literally, I can't even count how many times. And in some cases, we agree. And I think he makes some very valuable points and offers an important perspective. But I think in a number of cases, he makes some errors, perpetuates some mythology, and we'll get into that. I also, by the way, before we get out of here, want to come back and again, forgive me for this, but I because had some tech issues before we got started, and then Tony was right on time, and we didn't have all the time in the world. I skipped over some of the sincere greetings and well wishes to all of you who are joining us live, and those who will see this later, and those who are hearing this on iTunes or Spotify. I'm deeply appreciative that you check this out, and please like, share, subscribe, do all that, hit the bell, get all of the notifications, go to blackpowermedia.org and support the Patreon and help us continue to expand this collective. So anyway, I haven't seen the comments or the chat yet, but anyway, greetings to all of you anyway, and welcome. So I do also want to say that years ago when I was doing radio, this would have been in the early 2000s, I was doing radio with the WPFW 89.3 FM in Washington, D.C. Those listening or seeing this live later today, 3 to 5 p.m. is Brother Kaba's show, the African Deep Thought edition of Jazz and Justice. There's a lot of other great programming in the morning with Askia Muhammad. I think Jamil, my brother, is still working with him in the morning as well. And yeah, anyway, so definitely support and of course, much love and appreciation to Kasia Stitt. But years ago, I called Dr. Anderson's office and invited him to come on to talk about Powernomics. And I got a very interesting response from who reportedly was his assistant. And she told me something very interesting at the time. She said that Dr. Anderson was no longer giving interviews. And her reason, when I asked why, was that he said the Black community had not taken up his call sufficiently enough, and that the economic damage was insurmountable at this point. So he was going to redirect his energies to other more locally based projects. I thought that, I never have sought to reach out to him again. And it's only been in the last few years, admittedly, that I've seen a sort of resurgence of his name and reference and popularity. I may have been missing something, but so when this was sent to me, this is apparently the Comedy Central outlet for Charlemagne the God's show. In this episode, it was co-hosted or guest hosted by Chico Bean. Anyway, so because I'm not able to share the audio from the clips this morning, what I am going to encourage, and I would anyway, obviously, is people check the link and they can watch the 30-minute interview in its entirety at their convenience. And obviously, if anybody thinks I got anything wrong, Like my man Pierre at Comedy Hype said,
in the comments,
and I'll check it out. All right, so let me just get to my notes here. Okay, so all right. So the discussion is broadly about Anderson's work and his argument around why Black people are in the condition economically, materially, that we find ourselves, and speaking specifically of Black people here in the United States. So initially he's asked the question, is capitalism cap? And he says, yes, capitalism is cap because it was affirmative action for whites written into the Constitution. And he talks about some of the problems with interviews like this, or with any interview, is that people, especially something being condensed into a 30-minute interview. And by the way, I don't know to what extent this suffered through editing. So I should also, yeah, I'm glad I'm reminded to make that point. I don't know to what extent the interview that we see suffers from an edit that does a disservice to Dr. Anderson. So what we get is roughly 30 minutes. I don't know how long it was. I don't know if there were I don't recall feeling like there were some obvious cuts, but I don't know. What I do recall is that his answers are often meandering, contradictory, but because, as would be the case with anybody in that situation, their overviews and summaries with a lot of information and points being made very quickly, it's hard to catch and then address every single one, particularly live as an interviewer, even if Chico Bean had any cause to disagree or want any elaboration, he wouldn't have been able to. But even as someone watching it after the fact, there's just so much that he says in these very meandering answers. But he does say that it was that capitalism is cap. So he starts off with, because it was affirmative action for whites written into the Constitution. That might not be how I would, define or explain capitalism or its behavior. But I think that is, he starts off, but then he does something that I often think is mistaken in its narrowness when he talks about the 3/5 clause, the 3/5 amendment. Hold on a quick second here. Hold on. Hold on a quick second. Forgive me, everybody. Something has just a quick second here. Yeah, I don't know what is going. Okay. For some reason, we got a little confusion in the studio here. Oh, okay. All right. Okay. I see. Okay. I see. Okay. Ear Doctor has come to the rescue, try to help with some clips. Okay. Hold on a second. All right. Well, let's do this then. Let's do this. I appreciate you, Ear Doctor. We didn't plan this. So, but I like the freestyle. So let's do this. I'm going to send you the clip in the private chat here. Cause I have it actually queued up to what I want to play. So if you would go ahead and share and play that one. Let's do that one right there. And I don't hear anything though. You got to share the audio though. Are you able to get the audio going? Because I don't hear the audio. By the way, I hope everybody checked out Ear Doctor's Wu-Tang Sundays last night. And if you didn't, go check it out on the channel, unless they've snatched it already. He's live every Sunday at 8 p.m. Eastern. The joints are dope. But we're not hearing any audio from this, Ear Doctor. So let me at least just go ahead and continue on with this point here, and then feel free to continue to, and if you get the audio, we can play the clip that I have in the private chat there. But anyway, Dr. Anderson does this thing with the 3/5 clause that I think is often done and misses, I think, some important points that by describing the 3/5 clause simply as a method of dehumanization of African people. Certainly, African people had already, and of course, that was a further continuation of a dehumanization of African people who were being enslaved and abused, etc., and so forth. But the 3/5 clause also played another very important point, because it was not just about the suppression of Black humanity. It was as much about the suppression of the strength of the majority white vote, the white vote that did not own any enslaved people. So in other words, as both Du Bois and separately in another, obviously in his own distinct publication, Karl Marx, both arrived at the same number when assessing the amount of enslaved Africans held by whites in the South at the height of slavery. That is, and both concluded that roughly 7% of the white South owned 70% of all the enslaved population, meaning that overwhelmingly the white population who would have been looking eventually to become voters would have outnumbered the plantocracy, the slaveocracy. And could have theoretically used their vote to change their class position vis-a-vis whites. So it's not, of course, that African people weren't being dehumanized. That was already being the case through the process of enslavement and beyond. The 3/5 clause was akin to what I think happens today with Black and brown populations making up a majority of the population in many rural areas where they are held as captives in prisons, where by number they outnumber the white population that is nominally free and able to vote in that community. But because their electoral strength by number can't be used individually, but goes to the community in which they are held, they boost the electoral strength by their just being there of a white community that would not otherwise have that amount of electoral power. Obviously, it can't be used for Black and brown people held as captives any more than the clause at the time would have allowed, any more than the clause did or would or would not have allowed already enslaved people who could not vote anyway to be participants in the electoral system. So the 3/5 clause was ultimately a way to give the plantocracy an electoral strength beyond its numbers, given that only 7% owned a lion's share of those enslaved. Ear Doctor, are we able to play it? Did we get the audio straight? Thank you, sir. Go ahead. Let's run this right here.
And so when that was approved, as a matter of fact, they wrote the Constitution. They had 57 people that came to the United States for wealth rights from you, and they would call them founding fathers. Those rich whites came here to use their laws. And then out of 57, about 54 participated in drafting the United States Constitution. 3 of them, Thomas Jefferson, John Adams, and Alexander Hamilton. And they told him, so you 3 write up the Constitution of the United States. And he wrote in there exactly, here's what we want. And what did they want? They met for a whole week in Philadelphia. and they put guards on the doors and bars on the windows so nobody could hear this discuss how can we write a constitution that says this is an open country for freedom and opportunities for everybody. At the same time, we're talking about enslaving people and using them. And they said, here's what we do. When we write this constitution, we use very broad, ambiguous language. One for language for whites and one for black folk. Now, when they talk to use these very broad, ambiguous terms, that was for whites. When blacks, they use words that blacks couldn't figure out. 3/5 of a human being, equal to a field animals, those who are indebted, those who are obligated in the labor class. See, all that was talking about black folk. John Adams and Alexander Hamilton asked Thomas Jefferson, say, you write best. You wrote the Bill of Rights. We like that fancy language. You write it, put it together, and give it back to us. And use all those broad terms, stuff like all human beings have a God-given right to life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness. They didn't went there for no damn happiness. Nobody was sailing across the river for happiness. They were coming there for impersonal enrichment.
Right.
And after he approved the Constitution, then those three people with the founding fathers sent out messages to all those 5 groups that have been in that race trying to get across the ocean to build a new land, and told them, send us your people. And the emphasis they use, let's put that at the bottom of the Statue of Liberty. Give us your tired, those who don't want to work anymore. Give us your poor, those who don't have any money. What England and France and 2 other countries did, they clean out their prisons, their mental institutions, and their almshouses with poor people and send them to the United States.
And I bet you they didn't put that in the Hamilton play on Broadway.
No.
Left that right on out. And didn't put none of that in there. But with that being said, well, you know, as you always talk about.
All right, so that was that one part. I just wanted to make that part clear. And in fact, yeah. All right. So that was that one part. I just wanted to get that one part out, and then I made my point about the 3/4 clause. I just like to. So, and what I think happens here is that it's not that what Dr. Anderson is saying is wrong per se. It's that I think that the narrowness of its focus and the very including a narrow focus on the accuracy of what is done to Black people and Black humanity. It allows for what sounds like a very strong pro-Black message to later, as I'm going to show or suggest here, devolve into some very reactionary conservative talk around and eventually some very contradictory talk around capitalism. So he's already answering, that is, Dr. Anderson is already answering that capitalism is cap because it was set up constitutionally as an affirmative action program for whites. All right, so that's the first part of his of what he does here. I want to play this next clip, and I think Ear Doctor has it pulled up. Let me add it here. Let's play this next piece here and check it out. Go ahead, Ear Doctor. Thank you very much.
What's first we have to do is learn how to practice group economics and group politics. They say, and one of the 2 things that hurt us most during slavery, and it had not been focused on. One was that our wealth was stolen from us. Black folk weren't poor people when they were slaves. They weren't holding their assets, but they had one thing, was the most powerful, strongest, wealthy, valuable thing on earth. You know what that was?
No, sir.
Their labor. And see, and it's Black labor. Nobody teaches Black folks that. Your labor, that Black labor was the most invaluable thing they could have. Because you see, when they set up this Constitution, they said all of the wealth of this nation is going to be embedded in what we're going to set up right now. And the first thing is land. We said, so the whole purpose of slavery should have been an issue for Martin Luther King and all of our leadership for the last 200 or 300 years. And the purpose of slavery was to what? Was to transfer, to maldistribute 100% of all this country's land, resources, business, gold, silver, chrome, magnesium, timber, and rights, privileges, and ownership and control of everything, and put it in the hands of the dominant white society. That was the purpose of slavery.
Okay, Dr. Claude, my next question to you then is there such thing as black capitalism?
Yes, there is.
And how's
How's that
defined?
operated?
Yes, sir.
What we have to do is go back to what I told you earlier, that the whole point of slavery was the maldistribution of all resources, period, into the hands of one group.
Yes, sir.
What you have to do is create a situation where you can call some of that money back, or you can start creating your own wealth, and you can start getting it through reparations, or you can get it through inheritance.
Okay, well, why do you think black people struggle in the system that's set up for us now? Why do you think that happens?
Because you don't own and control the land, the tools, the resources, and everything else. When land was given out in America during the slavery period, that immigration was an open policy for everybody around the world to come to this country and get resources, except black folk. And during that period, first thing that George Washington said is that the wealth of this nation would be in the land. He said, I want 100,000 acres of free land. And Thomas Jefferson said, I want 100,000 acres of free land. And then after they heard that, Patrick Henry that says, give me life or give me death, he then said, I want 65,000 acres of free land. And then so consequently, during the period of slavery, during that from point 1 up to 3 up to 1862, that this country gave away 2 billion billion, okay, acres of free land, but it all went to whites, not to blacks. And see, and guess what? And all the land and then the wealth of the nation was in that land, in gas, in oil, in timber, and iron, and coal, and minerals, and all that kind of stuff. Black folk couldn't get any land because the Dred Scott decision of 1857 says you have no rights to get any land. And so the liberal white congressman in the Republican Party, called the Radical Republican, says we're going to correct that by creating a second constitution. And that's mean from 13 up to 15 will be a second constitution. This constitution, just like the first constitution from 1 through 12 amendments were strictly for whites, we're going to create another constitution. And following the Civil War, it's going to pick up 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendment and the civil rights laws. And those 3 things or 4 things will be strictly for black people.
But they don't got no land in there, though. But no land in neither one of them amendments.
Some of your strongest senators stood up on the floor of the House of Representatives and the Senate says this: there's only 2 things that black folk can be in this country. You're either going to be slaves or you're going to be free. But to be free, minimally, you must have 40 acres, a mule, and 1.
Man, the only person that is operating on that is Spike Lee. He's the only one that got 40 acres and a mule. And that's just a production company. That's crazy. You know what? Speaking of that, with it being such disparagement.
Hold on a second. So there's I think that's my fault. I think I missed a part there. But listen, so okay. On the one hand, oh, wait a minute. Okay. All right. I think what we need to do is go back and get Ear Doctor. Can you cue this clip up again? Because I think I missed the part that, because there's a part, first of all, there's a part previously where he talks about these professors on college campuses that talk nonsense about socialism. And I think we missed that part because the part I just had us play where he's talking about group economics comes after some of his discussion about how Du Bois defines capitalism, which I definitely want to come back to. So but in terms of what he just said about group economics and group politics, this is where, and then by saying that there is black capitalism and that we should be looking for reparations and inheritance. This is sort of the point that I keep saying is missed in all of this. On the one hand, he will acknowledge that we have no land. We have been through policy kept out of access to land, kept out of the access to wealth creating capability, but then says that we must return to a black capitalist ethic involving group economics that starts with a discussion again of inheritance, and reparations, both of which would require control over public policy and political power. The other part of it is, if we're practicing Black capitalism, then we're not practicing group economics. Because as is the case today and historically, we've talked about this before, across racial lines, while there of course are cavernous differences between the overall wealth accumulated, 20% of it, 20% of the population controls 80% of the wealth in each community: white, Black, brown, Asian, whatever. So that's not what he's suggesting by advocating Black capitalism, is that he's conflating Black capitalism with group economics, after having condemned in the part that I want us to come back to, socialism, Cuba. He inaccurately references Du Bois in his definition of capitalism, and then freezes Du Bois in 1915. So these are some of the things that I wanted to make sure we covered. And then he comes back to talk about did he say, and ear doctor, anybody in the chat, I'm actually looking at, did I miss the part where he talked about the Black man that is the reason we have chattel slavery? Anyway, ear doctor, you said you're ready. Let's go. Let's play this part again. And I think some of it might be a repeat, but let's play it anyway, please. Thank you.
To get to that point of generating Black wealth.
Capitalism never existed until about the 15th century. Prior to that time, we had mercantilism all around the world. Europe was a mercantilism stretch all the way around, as where people have just made a product, sold it. There was no system. And so every individual could go out in the mornings into the marketplace and sell his vegetables or sell whatever he wants to sell, shoes or clothes, and that was it. And so no, capitalism came out of Black people. And that's why it's a little concerning to me when I hear a lot of professors, particularly on college campuses, talking about anti-capitalism. Capitalism is the best thing we got going. And the opposite of that would be socialism. Capitalism means private sector owning and controlling resources and being able to make profit. People say, well, Dr. Anderson, let's go for socialism and just push socialism where the government owns everything and they control everything and with restraints, and all the profits go straight to government. I ran that down in Cuba. Very few people own anything. Ever since about the late 1950s, there were no private businesses of any magnificence. Everything is just simply same cars have been there since 1950, are still running. Just repair the same old cars. And a few businesses that exist, you got to be close to a prince or a god to get a business in Cuba.
Wow.
And that's why most of those Cubans that came into Miami, they flew out of there right quick because they wanted to practice capitalism. So let's go back and talk about what capitalism is right fast. Capitalism, as you and I discussed earlier, capitalism came about because of what happened with Henry the Navigator back in the early 1400s.
Yes, sir.
And somewhere between 1445 and 1455. He picked up almost 16 Black slaves, they weren't slaves at that point, Blacks off the coast of Africa. And he brought them back into the European theater. And he decided, what do I do with these people? And so he went to the Vatican in Italy and gave them to the Vatican. And why? Because the Catholics had a reputation at that time around the world as being the religion that was concerned about helping people that needed help. And then people that were classified as slaves to be their mediators, to bring comfort to them, their comforters. And so the Catholics, but at the same time, the Catholic was milking them in the sense that whatever resources they had, or they could get out of them, they took it to the Catholic Church. That's where at that time they said all roads lead to Rome, because the Catholic is spread out all around the world. Catholic is going into the Middle East, they're going into Latin America, they're going into the Caribbean, and they were going there trying to pick up one thing that was extremely important: wealth. They wanted wealth. And the Vatican was loaded down with wealth, all kind of wealth, where we had gold this, gold that. But after Henry the Navigator gave those 16 Blacks to the Vatican Church, the Vatican then said, we got to use these people. We use them as labor around the Vatican. And they used them for about 40-some years. And then about 1488, Pope Innocent came out and with a public edict that says, you know what? I got an idea that we no longer have to keep encouraging people to use Indians and primitive groups for slaves. There's another group of people that'll be better at providing labor than the Indians, who are weaker people. Let's use Africans, these blacks out of Africa. And he said, up to this time, to be a slave, you had to be one of three things. One, you had to be a victim of religious persecution. Two, you have personal indebtedness to somebody, and they now say you owe me, and so now you're my property. And three, again, to be a POW, a prisoner of war.
Yes, sir.
And so Pope Innocent's public edict says, let's do it this way. Let's put those three things aside and say, here's a better group of people that you can use, not based on those three factors, but it's based on another fact. That's on their skin color. That's them highly recognizable. You can spot them any place. You know who they are. They can't just escape and run away. You can spot them in a minute and use them. And so he threw in the whole thing about skin color. Now, that was 1488. But ironically, at the same time, Columbus was making these expositions into the Western world and going to different places, down in Haiti and down into the Caribbean islands. And finally, he says, you know, there's some land up around in here. I only saw a very few scattered people there look like Indians. This will be open land. I could use this. So he went back to England, went back to Spain, and he told the people, you know, I found a lot of vacant land, but only a few people on it. And right now here in Europe, we are undergoing terrible conditions. We are overrun right now with crime, criminals, highwaymen robbing people, killing people on the roads. We got famine, where people are starving to death. They can't find enough food in the country. And we also got a lot of other problems that cannot be solved right now because we don't have enough land and money to do it. They said, what if we were to take and do two things? What if we were to put all that vacant land in the Western world up for grabs and say, now let's use these blacks and use them as labor. And they said, and that was about the late 1490s. So by 1502, they put those two together and came up with what you call capitalism. Capitalism is owning and controlling the land, the tools, the resources, and using other people's labor to enrich yourself and your business. That is capitalism.
Goodness gracious. And came from somebody named Pope Innocent. What
Yeah.
type of name is that for a motherfucker that would do something so evil? Pope Innocence. That's crazy. Well, there we have the definition of capitalism right there. So let me ask you another question. Yes, sir.
Another point is that now later on, about 1915,
Yeah.
W.B. Du Bois
Here we
tried
go.
to define capitalism. He came pretty close to saying the same thing.
Okay.
And now it's much simpler the way he said. He says that capitalism is simply just getting like having 3 to 4 ears of corn. He said, and you get seeds and get the corn. You plant, you harvest, you sell, and you save the other seeds for next year harvest. Make profit of. He said that's capitalism: earning, savings, selling, and planting the seeds for next year.
There you go.
All right, so and ear doctor, thanks again for the production support, and I believe we're going to have in a couple minutes one more clip, and I'm going to put the link in the private chat for you. I'll come to this in a couple minutes. Thank you again, sir. So okay, so and to me this relates very well to what we're going to talk about in a little bit when we're talking about Dhoruba bin Wahad's very important statement, because to me this is one of the reasons why so many in my generation, so many in the generations that come into my classrooms are what I would just simply describe as economically or politically confused. What Dr. Anderson said there, and again, to the extent that this is not the fault of editing, although I'm not sure how it could be, but you know, that answer is wildly contradictory on so many different levels. First of all, let's start with the whole point about professors in the classroom teaching socialism. I'm happy to be corrected on this, but from my own university to universities across this country here in the United States, I am unaware of any socialist economic studies program or institute or school of socialist studies. There are business schools. There are plenty of mainstream economics programs and departments. I'm not aware of any Marxist school of economics. So to the extent that there are left-wing academics or those like myself and others who would talk positively about socialism or communism or Marx in the classroom or in our work, we do so as marginalized, outside of the mainstream, under-supported, if not totally assaulted and attacked, demonized. So this idea that permeates much of these segments of Black studies, segments of Black nationalist and Black radical communities, that there is this liberal left-wing education taking place on college campuses, that is wildly inaccurate. Overt socialism is not welcomed. So that's one thing. His comments about Cuba are just wildly anti-historical. First of all, Cuba has welcomed and supported and defended Assata Shakur, the late Nahanda Abiodun, and others. So points, just on that. Points. Socialists, by the way. Okay. Attacked and exiled from the United States largely for their Black radical application of socialism. Okay. Never mind everything else about the Cuban Revolution. I would really hope that I would love for Dr. Anderson to have a conversation with the good folks, Eugene Puryear, Net for Freeman, anybody, PSL, BAP, PACA, AAPRP. I would love for him to have some conversations and revisit some of that discussion of Cuba and its importance historically to African people in this country and around the world. Never mind the accuracy of their application of socialism and this idea, as he talks about, the reason they fix cars and that they have cars that work is because, one, they are there is a blockade. There is routine efforts, terrorist attacks sponsored by the United States against the Cuban Revolution. There is all kinds of so they're cut off from the broader economy. But then there is the positive side of, why do we need new cars? If we can fix a car and keep it running, why do we have to go by this capitalistic planned obsolescence lifestyle of we create it so it will die, so we have to buy another one? That's one of the reasons why the planet is dying. I mean, there's just so many things wrong with that, and Cuba and socialism deserves so much better than what they got in that conversation. This idea, though, that he also contradicts himself. Capitalism, he says, is both good and born out of the enslavement of African people. But somehow socialism is the problem. So he recounts a relatively accurate history of the rise of European imperialism and the development of capitalism on the backs of enslaved Africans, but then somehow says that is the system that we need to engage further. And that socialism is somehow to be demonized. That is a wild contradiction. What did I write here? Capitalism allows people to own as opposed to socialism, right? Because he's saying that we don't want the government to own. We want individuals to own. As again, somehow as if private business and industry is more suitable to the Black condition or to a free society. Socialism is not per se the government gets all the money. It's as he talks about, if there is a maldistribution created by capitalism, we need a planned redistribution, which would be created by socialism. So it's not that the government takes everything, it's that the government assures that nobody goes without in a properly functioning socialist society. One that, again, when people point to condemn the examples of, whether it be Cuba, the Soviet Union, or elsewhere, the first thing they always leave out are the outside forces that have constantly attacked, destabilized, discouraged, assassinated, etc., people who have tried to develop those societies. I remember the good folks. I did not know this until I went into a study session with Eugene Puryear and Brian Becker of the Party for Socialism and Liberation. And I get it that Dr. Anderson and others might not want to engage these folks or certainly join those organizations, but some of the history would be important. 17 countries invaded Russia after the 1917 Russian Revolution. 17, no less than 17. So if you are invaded and blockaded and attacked and insulted, I mean, how can you then turn around and say, well, that's because socialism failed? Meanwhile, look at what capitalism has produced: enslavement, colonization, wild inequality, and the need for a Dr. Anderson to be brought in to explain to people what to be done. Now, our disagreements notwithstanding, the point is he's only there to address a persistent problem created by capitalism while he's telling us that capitalism is the solution. He then goes into that point about Du Bois, which is again a pet peeve, but shouldn't really just be a pet peeve. It's just objective analysis. You cannot quote Du Bois, an avowed socialist, misquoting and narrowing and misrepresenting something he would have said in 1915 if, for instance, you're going to ignore just something we happen to be studying right now in my AAPRP study circle, The World in Africa, where Du Bois outlines how capitalism and imperialism are destroying everything and everybody, how capitalism is and imperialism are what undergird or are the font or the point of departure for all of the world wars. The second one, after which he's writing this book. He's saying the world in Africa. He's saying Africa is being destroyed. We need a Pan-Africanist socialist society because imperialists are destroying Africa, because the whole point of World War II, as is all of these other wars, are ultimately the resources of Africa. He doesn't quote Black Reconstruction. He doesn't quote anything beyond 1915, and he certainly doesn't quote Du Bois's concluding thoughts during his time as an expat in Ghana. Again, trying to organize an Nkrumah style Pan-Africanism under scientific socialism. So that he doesn't even mention Du Bois was a socialist while misrepresenting his definition of capitalism. So that's why when we would have come to the clip that I ended up playing out of order, and he's talking about group economics, and yes, there is a Black capitalism. The contradictions are just overwhelming. So in fact, he says in that other clip, and I think I might have messed that part up, but he talks about, he makes reference to something that I want to see if I can. I put the link in the show notes, and I don't honestly. We've already talked about on this program why I'm not necessarily a fan of this particular Black Studies outlet, but the fact is that they have some important work there, and in this case, it can't be ignored. But he does make reference, and I don't know if I can. Yeah, I can. Right. Because at one point, Anderson, scroll this up here. And no, this is not Tyler Perry, it's Tyler Perry. So let's not. I don't want anybody to think that we out here finding articles relevant to the situation from Tyler Perry. But in this article, The Curious History of Anthony Johnson from Captive African to Right-Wing Talking Point, Tyler Perry makes an important historical intervention on something Dr. Anderson reports in the piece, in the video we're talking about. So he comes back to say, after describing how capitalism is born off of African enslavement, and gives this twisted definition of capitalism, and then somehow says at the same time, yes, there is a black capitalism that we should access through reparations and inheritance. And I don't know where the inheritance comes in if black people don't have anything to pass down, and they don't have control over the public policy, as do those in power now, who use inheritance to make sure that wealth we all as a society help create doesn't get redistributed to address the maldistribution that Dr. Anderson is talking about. So in other words, what Dr. Anderson is saying is he wants black people to engage in the estate tax argument, or the death tax, as they like to call it, argument, the conservatives like to call it, which protects through public policy the ability for rich people, rich white people, to pass down their wealth to their descendants. Why this would be something we would want through blackness, and to see this as a positive and to be recreated in blackness, I don't understand. It doesn't make any sense. The point being, we all create the wealth that the wealthy walk away with, and then use public policy not only to take that wealth we all create, but to make sure that only their heirs access. So why we would want that, I don't know. Why, again, Dr. Anderson makes reference to Dr. King by saying that he weakened us, that what Dr. King did through this argument of integration weakened us, again, wildly disrespects Dr. King and what he was ultimately doing, and the concluding arguments he was making, again, often about socialism, that capitalism and imperialism are a problem, that federal public policy has to be directed to solve the problems, that black business is insufficient. I've already done a video, please check it, on how Maggie Anderson and others keep misrepresenting Dr. King as saying black capitalism and buying black was something that would work for us, when he said the exact opposite. Dr. King, by the way, also, as others like to point out, I think appropriately, walked through the fire of the shadow of death, or whatever, the valley of the shadow of death, and risked his life and ultimately gave his life. So I get that people like to make this argument that integration has weakened black communities, but as I and others have been trying to argue, Marisa Baradaran is right in this. You can segregate people, but you cannot segregate money. So this idea that segregated black economies are somehow better is part of the mythology and the fantasy. Now, again, I'm not advocating that we want white teachers teaching black kids and all this. I get all of those other issues around integration, but part of the mythology being promoted here is that economically black people could do better in a segregated situation, and that's mythological. That's not how things work. Plus, without public policy, political power, black people have no ability to either create segregated communities or prevent gentrification. So it's not that Dr. King created or a liberal a liberal reading of the civil rights movement. It's not that created integration, and it's not even that's not even what Dr. King and others were really advocating. They weren't advocating that black people be next to white people that makes black people better. They were saying, in a different way, the wealth we're all creating is not being distributed properly. But it's not Dr. King that created integration or gentrification. That's the political power. That's capitalist imperialist expansion. That's what the Civil War was. It was the North, the capitalist industries of the North invading the land that produced the natural resources they wanted. It was a colonial invasion. Again, that's what imperialism needs. Capitalism needs expansion. But he's promoting this idea that somehow, the segregated. So Again, right. So maldistribution is what socialism is meant to be a response to. But then he also makes reference to this guy that, and this is why I have this article pulled up, because he makes a reference and he says, and he tells this without reference to the name Anthony Johnson. Dr. Anderson makes this point that he makes reference to this black British dude who was the first black man to actually own, who was the first person to actually own enslaved Africans. So, and his point was somehow in making that convoluted argument that capitalism started with black people, both through the enslavement of Africans, but then also literally in this country, the first African being owned literally as chattel was by a black man named Anthony Johnson, which he doesn't name. Dr. Anderson doesn't name him. But as I just quickly note here, first of all, that history is just wrong. And I put this article in the show notes so people can read it in its entirety on their own from Tyler Perry. By 1651, Johnson gained his freedom and acquired land and servants. So Johnson had been an enslaved African who by 1651 gains his freedom and acquired land and servants, eventually attaining legal ownership for life over a black man named John Cassor, a condition that separated servitude for a lifetime from slavery, labor for life. That means separated servitude, labor for time, from slavery, labor for life. In 2010, Glenn Beck, the formerly famous former Fox whatever, asserted that this case reveals how Johnson owned the first state-sponsored slave in American history. And like-minded commentators unsurprisingly agree. In the same episode, Beck insisted that Johnson's story proves that slavery is a human problem. It's not a white condition or a black condition. As the narrative goes, if a black man also owned enslaved people of African descent, it assumes that economics, not racism, bolstered U.S. chattel slavery. For Beck, the existence of black slave owners inverts the narrative that American slavery was predicated on white supremacy. However, this narrow framework ignores preceding cases and misrepresents slavery's complex evolution in British Atlantic colonies. So then the article does go into detail about the history of how officially by law this country went from indentured servitude to slavery and who becomes this, that, and the third. My only point in bringing this up is that Dr. Anderson, as I'm suggesting in these other instances regarding Cuba, Du Bois, defining capitalism, universities' role in promoting socialism, and a few other issues that we're going to get to in a moment, he's misrepresenting history and sort of taking conservative arguments and trying to put a black radical presentation to them, so that by saying that by reciting the horrific history that leads to capitalism's development, but that somehow black people's involvement from the beginning in it, both as enslaved chattel and then owners of chattel, somehow means that this is the system we should engage. And in fact, he says in this interview, this is what we have to engage. This is what we have to do to get free. It's again, just like I'm arguing broadly speaking about black capitalism, buying power, etc. It takes a very conservative, reactionary, backwards argument, wraps it in black radical rhetoric and symbolism, and claims it as progressive advice or analysis or programmatic direction. All right, Ear Doctor, let's play this next clip where he is asked, and I thank you again for doing this. He's asked why capitalism. Let's play this.
Should we buy into a system that requires you to exploit others? Because this whole time we've been talking about capitalism and it's just been exploitation. Why should we want to buy into a system that operates on those morals and principles?
Because that's the only system you got going. And the other opposition is that, but you own nothing. Then you don't have to worry about it. That's called socialism, where the government owns everything. And the profit goes to the government. Yeah, see, if that were to happen, see, then black folk would become an island of socialism in an ocean of capitalism. See, for instance, Russia used to be a socialistic country. They're going capitalistic now. China was a socialistic country. They're going capitalistic now, where China, even when I was with President Carter, China was pretty much a backward country at that time, way back in the 1960s, 1970s. But now they're a leading nation where we used to have to lend them money. Now we are borrowing money from them. You know why? They went capitalistic. Right now, 57% of everything China produces, we buy it from them. And what we're doing now, they're taking the money out of this country and putting it in China. And we were foolish enough to play a game about not being capitalistic. We gave away all of our industries. We used to produce about 97% of all the commercial products in the world. Now we don't produce a damn thing except maybe the silicon chip out there. Now all of our money is going to Taiwan. We buy 57%, 47% of everything that India produces. Taiwan, South Korea, all the shoes. We used to produce all the radios, TVs, movies, cameras, everything. We don't produce a damn thing now because we don't want to be capitalistic. You better become capitalistic. You got to be able to make a profit because you got to pay the people. So right now, people in those foreign countries that came in and starting in the 1950s, when we started moving away from, when we started integrating, and all those big major industries moved into third world countries. And so now those third world countries got your money. We're buying products from them, and half those products won't even work.
Man, well, how can we thrive under the capitalism? Like, is it possible? With that being said, you say it's the best thing for us we got going. How do we thrive in it? How do we as Black people thrive under this system?
We thrive because we get some surplus capital in. We pool our own money. We pool our own money, buy our own products or services. And we build our own factories and industries in our own communities. And in our own communities, we have not one single community in America that's Black. Not one.
Got a lot of Black neighborhoods, no Black communities.
All we got are Black neighborhoods. A Black neighborhood is where you eat and sleep. A Black neighborhood is like a bucket with a hole in it, pouring water and it runs out. Everybody knows you cannot be a competitive group with no communities. But right now, everybody coming to this country got enough sense to say, I'm going to build Chinatown, Frenchtown, Germantown, Hockeytown. They build everything for their own people. And in that community, to qualify as a community, you must have three things. You must have a wholly independent economy that provides services, goods, and products, and jobs, and business and wealth-producing opportunities for your own people. That's the first thing you must have. The second thing you must have a code of conduct that tells you to buy from your own people first before you go down 2 miles down the road and buy it. And the last thing you must have elected officials that will represent you first and foremost before they represent everybody. Every time a Black person runs for office now, first thing he says, I'm for everybody. Then you shouldn't be running for office then. You need to go sit down and watch TV at home. Your first responsibility is to take care of those who put you in office. And then that's what you put your hand on the Bible for. And when you get sworn in office, you say this, I hereby swear on the Bible to protect and serve those who voted me into office. That's what Biden did. He swore an oath. But guess what? He got twice as much support from Blacks than he did for any other group in America. And guess what? He haven't even mentioned the word Black yet in a positive manner. And after the first year.
Yeah, he really
and see, you know why? Because Black people put people in office and never demand anything. Right. That's your fault. You should never support anything, not a candidate, not a political party, nor a business that doesn't support you.
Right.
If it's not supporting you, don't support it. And see, other groups won't do it. They will take care of their own people first and foremost. And most of my friends, whether my friends are lawyers or dentists, they tell you up front, no, I'm going to support the Jews first. That's what the Bible said. That's what John said. John said, yeah, I'll go off and preach to the world, try to save the world, but first I'm going to save Jews.
Even if this country gave us reparations, let's just say we got reparations, do you believe that it will actually help Black people? Do you think it will close the wealth gap in America?
I think it will close it some. Can't close it completely because it has to be more than money. First of all, you have to include land and also access to resources. Like I just mentioned to you earlier about if you're going to build the first high-speed rail system in the country, and Black folk are proposing it, and Black folk have already designed it to run from the East Coast all the way across to Los Angeles. Why in the hell don't you put some of that money in this budget you got coming up? If you're going to put $88 trillion into infrastructure, why don't you put some of that money so Black folk, for the first time in history, can own their own rail lines or have some ownership along with whites on a high-speed rail system running across the damn South.
Right. We can call it Soul Train.
That's right. But right now we call it the Southern Flyer as example. Right now, they got high-speed rail system across Europe, China, and Japan. And why is it not going to have one if Black folks propose it? Why don't you put in some of that money to help build a Black super rail system?
All right.
United States that can fly, can.
All right. All right. So thank you here, Doctor. And just on the production side, again, I appreciate you, and we're good with the clips. So you could take a break. I appreciate you though, man. Good looking out, popping up and on like that, coming through. So let me start with just quickly before, kind of where we agree. And this is where I think all of the confusion and the contradictions come in. So I appreciate, I haven't been in the chat yet, but I see, my man, Geechee, has sent me somebody's comment that says, I don't care. Dr. Claud is brilliant. I don't know. I'll skip some of that. It's a waste of time going back and forth about petty issues when everyone's larger goal is the same. We want to close the racial wealth gap. We want to build Black wealth. Whoever made the claim up was clearly just trying to get us to pay attention and start spending with each other. So again, this is why I'm saying I am not critical of Dr. Anderson in this sense or others for the most part, for as enemies, with hostility. But I don't think these are petty issues if I'm getting the context of that quote right. And this is something that's often brought to me when I raise these criticisms. But they're not petty differences. I think they're major problems of analysis and understanding that I think do inhibit our potential and where we can go. So for instance, the contradictions here are pretty clear. In addition to what I've already said, just in this last clip, what Dr. Anderson is advocating is public policy that supports and redistributes wealth we all create in the society to Black businesses so that those businesses can grow. In other words, it's the same arrangement these major white corporations and others have in this society, where they will claim private capitalism and the private business world can do everything, but all of them depend on, for a lion's share of their wealth, contracts and redistributed wealth through the federal government, whether it's redistributed through the Pentagon, redistributed through CARES and HOPE Acts, redistributed through banking policy. Like I said, what the conservatives call the death tax or the estate tax, like all of those policies extract wealth. And again, we're creating the wealth, whether we own a business or not. Again, this is part of the mythology that I'm trying to point out that has been intentionally created, and encouraged by our actual enemies for distractive purposes, to distract us. Black capitalism, chief among them. So he's right in saying we need political power. We need candidates that are beholden to our communities. We shouldn't be voting for campaigns and candidacies and parties that don't help our people. I get and agree with all of that, but that's exactly my point. That's my point about the after party concept. That's been my point about condemning many, and I don't know where Dr. Anderson was, but many in his circle they're the ones telling us we got to vote for Biden. We got to vote for the lesser of evil. There are many in those Black nationalist communities that will, on the one hand, promote this radical Blackness, but when it comes to electoral politics, they will vote for these folks. They will encourage us to vote for these folks, or they will tacitly encourage us to vote for these folks by not advocating that we do something else. So there's not a discussion of the development of a political party. There's not a discussion. So his three things, I think, are far inferior to George Jackson's. So when he says we need an independent economy, there's no such thing. There's no such thing as an independent economy anywhere. We need a code of conduct. I could agree with that. which is really public policy, and we need elected officials. So I like George Jackson's 3. We need an underground army, but I'm not advocating that because I'm not doing it, and I'm not, we're not ready for that. We're not there, and I'm not advocating that. I just happen to think that it's logical. But we also need an alternative political party and an alternative media system that will promote the idea of revolution. So there is some overlap. That's what I'm saying. It's not like I think Dr. Anderson is an enemy. I just think that there are some important distinctions to be made. So I do think we need an independent political movement to get political power, however that comes to be. Again, I'm sometimes misinterpreted here as saying we should be voting for Democrats or something like that. That's not what I'm saying. We do need elected officials because what Dr. Anderson is saying is right. Without this is where Dr. King himself said, without federal redistribution of the wealth we are all creating, there's no independent economy anyway. Because look at in fact he's saying our independent economy is based on federal public policy that redistributes wealth we create and invests in Black businesses. Now, because people simply insert this layer of Black business as opposed to elected officials or representatives of the community, in other words, we shouldn't have to be entrepreneurs to benefit from the wealth we create when we engage those who are. I don't care about how good someone is at coming up with ideas or marketing their ideas if they don't have healthy, if they don't have healthy, living, conscious, or I guess they don't even need that. If they don't have a living person who will come in and shop and buy their product, it doesn't matter. They cannot create wealth. If they cannot attract venture capital and further investment, there is no business. In fact, I just saw a documentary the other day that was talking about that broke down for those of us who remember Blockbuster Video, the only reason Blockbuster streaming service didn't overtake Netflix was from the speed of one investment. Netflix got venture capital before Blockbuster streaming got it and then got bought up. That was it. It wasn't that Blockbuster didn't have the idea. In fact, they had the idea first to move from their already successful tangible video rental service to a streaming service. They were actually ahead of Netflix. But the venture capital went to Netflix. So that's it. So that's sort of my point here. I shouldn't have to be a good business leader to benefit from the wealth that the commerce in my society creates, the benefits of the wealth that commerce creates. Reparations requires a political movement. So I agree that it should include land and resources, but that's not happening. They're not. The 4 white men that own more land in this country than all of Black people combined, they're not giving that up without some sort of political movement. And once that land is given up, to make the owners of it Black, but have the wealth distributed as in a Black capitalist way, meaning we will just see more maldistribution to a Black elite, that's not the answer. So if you want a soul train, you have to have all kinds of things. You have to have venture capital, federal investment. You would have to have whatever the license, the deals are, the rights to build your railway wherever. And then why would you want a soul train or when this bullet train idea that would be federally funded, as is discussed by Dr. Anderson, should just be federally funded? That is, it shouldn't matter if it's a Black business that builds it. All of us should benefit from the wealth that goes into it and that it creates. So this incessant focus on a black capitalist, black business person intermediary is part of the mythology here that I think needs to be discarded if we're actually going to move anywhere. By the way, he does one other thing, and I don't know if it's possible, or if I'm capable, or if it's been done and I'm just not aware, but this constant comparison to Jews and other groups has got to stop. Black people, obviously, are not Jews. There is a specific historical relationship going back millennia that positioned Jews to do what they have been able to do to the extent they've been able to do it. And I don't know why we would want to see black people replicating a very white supremacist, you talk about integration, a white supremacist integration into a society that previously didn't even want them to be white, doesn't see them as white really still to this day, and that only accepts them to the extent that they participate in an imperial system, a Zionist projection of Western empire into the so-called Middle East, and whatever their negative interventions are here in the United States through a reactionary relationship with black people. So whether we're talking about traditionally as landlords or bosses in entertainment, whatever, why would we want to see black replication of that? As if it were possible. The only reason Jews were placed in that position in the first place was because of their previous relationship with the Gentiles and the imperial states that have emerged against the interests of all humanity, by the way. So again, the specifics in the history of why there are Chinatowns and to what extent they are beneficial to the Chinese people is itself mythological. We covered here a few weeks ago the earlier this year claim that China had eradicated extreme poverty. How? Not through capitalism, through state-sponsored socialist redistributionist policies. So this idea that they're purely capitalist is misunderstanding what's happening in China. I would argue probably the same thing in Russia. And again, to what extent are these efforts beneficial to the people there? Do we really want to replicate the post-Soviet Union Russia? Again, why, Dr. Anderson, has the Soviet Union collapsed and evolved into a Russia with in that book that the author was killed, actually. I didn't know that. The Rise of Gangster Capitalism, I think was the book. Why would we want that? So he doesn't talk about the conditions of the people in those countries or in those communities. What are the conditions of the Chinese people in Chinatowns? Is it even possible for black people to replicate those communities going forward? Again, I don't think any of that's even possible, much less something that we would want. So anyway, so again, that's why these are just some of the, anyway, I just wanted to go through some of that. I think that's basically all I had on this, but I think that oh, that was the other point. He said the only celebrities he trusts are Ice Cube and to a lesser extent Kanye West. Now, this is what I'll do as a segue. Among the reasons why I think that there is so much persistent confusion around economics and politics is the absence of, in this moment, sustained, large enough, radical enough, organized political social movements. I think we're still suffering in the aftermath of COINTELPRO, and into this vacuum has entered a lot of ignoble actors, bad analysis, psychological warfare, and confusion. So So again, I don't think Kanye and Ice Cube, and again, I've just talked about Kanye. I don't think that there are enemies. I think that the confusion that they exhibit and the relationship that I think would also be similarly confused between Dr. Anderson and Ice Cube or Kanye is the result of that. Not that these people are enemies or the evildoers, so to speak, but that we don't have movements enough to affect or to affect them in the way that we would want. And then celebrity not coming out of politically organized spaces is not going to have the solution. And they're not going to have the power to enact it if they wanted to, if they did have the solution. By the way, so I think, and I'll stop there, I think that is why, as I want to get to now in this important statement from Dhoruba, what we see that Dhoruba is responding to, and why, unfortunately, and I hate to have to say this, I think I disagree with him. So anyway, I mix what I like. We'll be right back.
Mix what I like, what I like, what I like, what I like, what I like.
All right, everybody. Thanks for sticking with us here as we go a little bit longer than usual here at I Mix What I Like live on Black Power Media. Please do take a moment, if you haven't already, and hit that join, like, share, or subscribe button. Click the bell so you're not missing any of our latest that comes almost faster than I can even keep up with. And there's so much more coming. So again, and I will, before we leave this morning, and even certainly after, later, come back and check some of the comments in the chat and try to respond to some of it. And of course, we can always do more on this as well. Okay, so the other day, I think this was on the Remix Morning Show. We talked about, and we played the clip. Yeah, it was on the Remix Morning Show, right? Because we played the clip from Fred Hampton Jr. talking about why he didn't like Fred Hampton leftists and others claiming the name of Fred Hampton. And doing so without not only permission, but without the politics and that solidarity of struggle. And my only 2 cents on that was that I appreciated Fred Jr. for saying that. I have felt a similar way. I feel a kind of way about people claiming certain names and references without particularly recognizing or adhering to or even agreeing with the radical politics involved with those references. Dhoruba sent me a message. Of course, Dhoruba bin Wahad, interviewed on this platform many times, and looking forward to many more. Co-founder of or member of the BLA, member of the Black Panther Party, political prisoner, my favorite philosopher and political analyst. But he wrote back, he sent me something, and he, critical of today's generation. And I invited him on to talk about it. And he said, no. And he said, read the following instead. So I will. So, quote, "First, let me say, I am too heartbroken, ashamed, embarrassed, and humiliated in the wake of recent events to speak publicly again on live formats. I am so disappointed in this generation that I would feel foolish and crazy if I did any interview of Zoom meeting because I know now deep in my heart that I am living among a callous and venal generation with little integrity, dignity, or sense of their place in this world. So no, I am not willing to come on the air and express myself on the issue of branding or its related issues. However, I trust that you would announce my response to your invitation as follows." In response to your invitation to talk about the branding of revolutionaries and the historical notoriety of organizations like the BPP or BLA, I am unwilling to talk publicly, not because I have nothing to say, but because I believe that whatever I say would be an exercise in futility. Here is why. I am absolutely ashamed of being in this country amidst a generation of Black people who are cowards and who have cowered in the face of unspeakable dehumanization and disregard by the white supremacist capitalist construct that is white America. I am deeply ashamed and unable to hold my head high as a Black person while surrounded by a venal, self-centered, and arrogant generation of Black people who have systematically placed micro-oppression of small segments within the Black community above the macro-oppression of an entire people, and think that somehow that's correct and laudable. I am heartbroken that opportunists, charlatans, and messianic leaders have persuaded the masses of Black people that we can liberate and empower ourselves with leadership by victimhood, and who have convinced Black people only they possess the power of prayer and must follow movements ideologically led by victimhood rather than revolutionary abolitionist politics and organization. Admittedly, I am sad and despondent that some of the best years of my youth were wasted and served little useful purposes other than to inculcate in another generation of Black youth the feeble-minded notion that white America would deliver justice for Black people without their knowledge of certain retribution, or that social and political equality can be achieved absent an equal distribution of the pain and anguish we as people must live with and endure every day. In other words, in the real world, there is no justice without retribution, and no social and political equality without equal distribution of the pain. I mistakenly thought that by embracing the warrior and radical spirit of my ancestors who rose up against the people, system, and hateful mentality that murdered us, kidnapped us from Mother Africa, dehumanized us at every turn, and diabolically instilled in each generation of Black people fear and terror of racist violence and inevitable annihilation until we could only imagine resistance to racist tyranny with their permission and assert our humanity and power on their terms and under their benevolence. In short, the white supremacist construct that began as a European settler state that devolved into terms that under their In short, the white supremacist construct that began as a European settler state devolved into terms and under their benevolence. In short, the white supremacist construct, okay, hold on a second. This is my fault. Hold on. In short, the white supremacist construct that began as a European settler state and devolved into the capitalist nation state today has convinced Black people, African people, that we cannot win our freedom, our own freedom, and the dignity as a sovereign people without selling our souls to servicing white privilege, greed, and wealth to achieve the placebo of second-class citizenship. It is in this deeply bitter shame that washes over me as I watch our enemies, the very enemies of the sun that nourishes brown and Black melanin of our skin, arrogantly define their justice for our pain, while our children beg to advise them that, quote, Black lives matter, rather than impose on our enemy that Black liberation matters. I therefore decline to speak, talk, or otherwise whistle in the wind on media platforms until such a time as this generation finds its destiny, live up to it, or further betray it. If this generation looks for me in the whirlwind, I will come, wade in the water, and woe to those who cannot swim. End quote. Powerful words from Dhoruba bin Wahad. And the only thing I tried to share with him and what I would have wanted to invite a discussion of with him is that I don't think sufficient appreciation for the context that produced this generation is included. And I am uncomfortable with that kind of condemnation of a generation, even as I understand he has every right to tell me I'm wrong and to take that position. And if anybody has earned the right to say anything, I think it is Dhoruba, certainly whether I or anyone else agrees. But I do think, and that was also something that I disagree with in terms of the off-quoted statement from Frantz Fanon, that each generation must, fulfill its, how did even Dhoruba just put it? That each generation must find its destiny, live up to it, or further betray it. It was a great line. I get it. And I understand it in the context that revolution is a process that must be passed down generationally, but that's sort of the point. I certainly don't feel like my generation was passed down some radical movement any more than successive generations, not the least of which this one, has had anything given to it. I also think my bias in terms of work's focus is that in the aftermath of COINTELPRO, in the aftermath of the assaults on these organizations and the people like Dhoruba who have been removed from our histories and our commentary for so long, as a more powerful and pervasive and controlled media environment that seems to be more free and inclusive has emerged and evolved or been imposed on us, I don't understand how we could expect anyone to have reached any different conclusion. As much as I disagree with so much that people are doing and saying, I think if we step back and offer a relatively objective analysis, I think it has to include the fact that we can't expect more. Part of what I was saying about my criticism of Dr. Anderson is that he himself exists. His career, his analysis that he represents, and he's not the only one, only exists because of that same vacuum created by the counterintelligence program and its compatriots. How can generations who would have heard much more of a black capitalist argument, of a celebrity-driven culture argument, of a history that doesn't even include reference to the Panthers, much less the BLA, that doesn't explain what capitalism is, much less socialist alternatives, how could we expect anything else? So that would be it. That would be my, so I think that this, to the extent possible, this is why I think we have to continue to work with each other, whether it's, I don't care, Black Alliance for Peace, Pan-African Community Action, the All-African People's Revolutionary Party, Community Movement Builders, the FTP movement. I don't, whatever it is, we have to be more involved and more clear on what it is that we want if we're going to expect anyone. So even in our discussion offline, Dhoruba brought up what often people do, the Vietnamese struggle and how it was handed down generationally. But that was the point. It was handed down generationally. And I know this it's jacked up, but obviously I don't mean it in any, but if you have the quote unquote benefit of constantly being invaded on a land that you already know is yours and have had historically, I think it's easier to pass down generational struggle than it is in a society where you have been a captive on someone else's stolen land and then mythologized through not only the most aggressive and hostile of physical violence, but the most pernicious psychological warfare the world has ever seen. No one has suffered more psychological warfare than the people, particularly Black people, but anyone in the United States. No one has suffered it more than people here, Black people here in particular. So, and are suffering it more now than ever. When Kanye, Ice Cube, and Dr. Anderson are dominating the analysis of most of our people, we cannot be said to be in a position to hand down radical struggle to the extent that I think Dhoruba rightfully, justifiably would expect. So that's just my humble disagreement on that. And I hope we can continue to struggle. And I look forward to when he comes back, decides that he is willing to come back and grace us with a little bit more. So anyway, all right, another quick break and let's come back and wrap up with a few more pieces here, right here that I'm
Put it in the comments.
Yeah, definitely do that too.
I mix what I like, what I like, what I like, what I like. what I like, what I like, what I like.